yeah, so if they miss anything, they can catch it. But
Great. Well, do you have anything to kick things off, Cindy, or can I go ahead and should I just get started?
please go right ahead. I think everybody is very familiar with the Peer Recovery COE now.
All right, great. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Supervising Volunteers. This is my, I think, third time back with you. So nice to see you all again. My name is Nikki Miller. I use she, her pronouns. I've been a trainer with the MAVA Volunteer Impact Leadership Training Series for, I don't know how long, 7, 8 years, something like that. But really enjoy doing these trainings. Just a little about me in case you've probably met me before, but in case not, I have worked with Planned Parenthood North Central States for a little over 20 years. And that's the area that I'm in covers Minnesota, the Dakotas, Iowa, and Nebraska. However, I live across the border from Minnesota and Wisconsin, so I'm sitting in my 1960 Shasta canned ham camper right now, which is where I work when I'm not in the office. Hopefully my internet's usually pretty stable out here. If I do drop out and you miss anything, flag me, because sometimes I'll just be talking and talking and talking and no one can hear anything. So usually I can hear, when that happens, I can hear you, even if you can't hear me. So raise your hand or speak up if you missed anything or my internet drops out and I don't notice, but should be good, I hope. And let's see, what else about me? Most of my career, or maybe about half of my career, was spent leading our volunteer and intern programs for Planned Parenthood. So really involved with MAVA, was really involved with the National Network for Planned Parenthood Volunteer Leaders. So lots of experience in that field. However, I don't work with our volunteers and interns now. So I actually work in the ambiguous world of organizational effectiveness, learning and development, and employee engagement and recognition and all that stuff. So I don't do this as my job anymore, but I still love presenting with MAVA, and I love folks who work with volunteers and work with communities. So we will be together until about noon. Halfway through, depending on how we're doing for time. If you all want to take a 5-minute stretch break, I built in a little time for that. But basically today we're going to talk about what it takes to be an effective volunteer supervisor, or to give tools to other folks who supervise volunteers so you can help them on that. So I'm going to present. I will share my screen. Okay. Hopefully you all can see my screen. Can I get a thumbs up, head nod, etc.? Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So supervising volunteers. Again, if you were with me before, and I think some other trainers use this as well, we are going to use Menti today to do some polling, some word clouds, etc. So either you can open another window in your browser, or if you have another device, if you have a phone or a iPad or anything like that, go to www.menti.com and use the code 24349724. And Wendy put it in the chat as well. Thank you. So head over to Menti, and little icebreaker, 1 to 3 words. How are you feeling this morning? All right, overwhelmed, we're hearing in the chat, feeling pretty nice, good. Excited, tired, determined, warm, and happy. Lots of tired. Yeah, I had a 4-day weekend. So it was a little bit of a rough start this morning. My first meeting was at 8:30, and even someone who never misses meetings totally forgot about it and didn't show up to our meeting. I was like, yep, that's the vibe we all need to go into for the week. Ready to go from Mike. Thank you. Awesome, thank you. So another thing we're going to do today, We're going to do some quizzes for points today as we're going, just to liven things up a bit. So, oh, I love that we've got an emoji in there too. So first question, if you can go to menti.com, you should be able to punch in if you want to put a name in there. I think you can. We're going to do a little quiz here. This is just going to be a practice quiz. And again, menti.com, code 243-49724. I see we've got some people assembling. So go into the room and we're going to do a practice quiz to get warmed up. Okay. So if you get a correct answer, you will get maximum points. These won't be timed. Practice quiz. What will we be discussing in this training module? Managing risk, supervising volunteers, or our summer vacation plans? All right. Nice work. Everyone got it. Good job. Okay, so that was just the warm-up quiz. Let's see how we did. Nice job. Okay, after this, they're timed. So you're going to get points based on how quickly you answer the question. So get ready to go in again. Question 2 of 8. So answer fast. What day is it? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or is it pandemic? Nice. Yeah, maybe I should have accepted pandemic, but yep, it is Tuesday. I'm amazed that I even knew that. Nice job. Okay. Okay, we're going to do one more. Oh, this isn't a quiz, actually. This is just a word cloud. Go back to Menti. What's one thing you wish you could tell a past or present supervisor? So again, since we're going to be talking about what are some good skills of a supervisor, what does it take to be an effective supervisor? Think back of all the supervisors you've worked with. What do you wish if you could slip them a note years later, if need be, or your current supervisor? What would you tell them? Communicate. I love this. We've got exclamation points today. Stop micromanaging. Yes. I like this. Positive. How impactful they were on my professional and personal life. I appreciate all you did for me. I was a butt. I love that. Thank you for all your help. You need to be clear on what you want. My supervisor likes to say clarity is kind. And if you prefer, you can come off mute and share as well, or share in the chat. You are strong, need direction on how to present yourself in a loving manner. Thank you for being so positive. Good, good, good. This is all great. And now, again, just another warm up to be talking about getting the creative juices going, to think about supervision. Submit one word in Menti beginning with the letter S that best describes your previous experience with supervising volunteers, either as a supervisor or as a supervisee, if you were the one being supervised. So think of the letter S. What's a word that describes your experience either as the supervisor or as the person who was being supervised? Strict. Stunning. Smiles. Silent. Slow. Strong. Smooth. Nice work. So yeah, it sounds like from everything we're hearing here, suspect, very good. from what we're hearing here so far this morning, I think we can summarize by saying that some supervision experiences sound like they've been quite positive. Others have been maybe stressful. Maybe it's due to lacking clarity of what's expected, either of the supervisor or the person being supervised. A lack of feeling competent in the skills of supervision if you're the supervisor, or maybe not having a competent supervisor if you're the one being supervised. Sometimes some other things that haven't come up yet, lack of time to be a good supervisor, or being really busy, or having a really busy supervisor. And we'll also talk a little bit today about just some bad experiences in supervising difficult volunteers. So we'll talk through all of that today. And our learning objectives today, our next almost 2 hours together, won't be a really in-depth how-to session, but rather a general view of the role and skills that you need to be an effective supervisor with volunteers. Whether you're the one who's doing the supervising yourself, or you need to share some information about these skills with your colleagues to make them better supervisors as well. As always, we will, if you look at your handouts, there are a lot more details on how to implement what we discussed today. So any questions before we move into the concepts and what we're going to cover today? Okay, number one. So first concept, people who supervise volunteers need to clearly understand their role. So that's kind of the first step, is you need to understand what's expected of you as a supervisor to even be able to be effective at it, right? So we're going to go back to Menti again. Let's do another quiz. So menti.com, use the code, I'm talking like a Minnesotan, code 24349724. And this is going to be another timed quiz. So everyone get your phones out. Just start the countdown. Answer fast to get more points. Excellent supervisory skills are measured by, what do you think? Your personal accomplishments, title, and salary, how many pats on the back you receive daily, or the success of those who report to you. What do you think the right answer is? Time's up. All right, everyone got it right. Although, you know, if you can get a good title, some good salary, pats on the back are always nice, but ultimately good supervisors are the ones who, where the people who report to them are actually the ones who are successful in accomplishing a lot. So sometimes supervision is all the guts, and hopefully if you're doing it well, the people who report to you are getting all the glory, right? Nice job, everyone. Good, good, good. We've got Teresa Kim in the lead as the fastest, followed by Frosty, Sarah, Laura. Nice job. So what is supervision? Supervision is basically the process of motivating and overseeing the work of others. So hopefully if you're following the spirit of supervision using this definition, it keeps you out of, like, you know, you think of some of the words we saw are like micromanaging, being strict. This sort of supervision, I really like it because it really frees you up to think less about I'm managing people and more about I'm motivating them and just overseeing their work so that they can be successful. So supervision is an all-encompassing activity that involves the process of stimulating, motivating, overseeing other people's work. But ultimately, like I've been saying, it's imperative that folks who are the leaders of staff or volunteers have a sense of clarity about their roles and responsibilities with regard to supervising the volunteers who have been entrusted to them. And again, we talked about this a second ago. Excellence in supervisory skills generally is not measured by your personal accomplishments, but by the success of the people who report to you. And a good supervisor, sometimes I have this conversation a lot. I do a lot of leadership development in my job. And one thing that comes up a lot and that we struggle with is oftentimes we promote folks to supervisory jobs because they're really good at the job that they do. They know how to do the skills to do the job, And eventually we're like, you're so good at doing this job, we're going to make you a supervisor of other people who do it, which is fine. But also it's not necessarily required that you're good at doing the thing that the people who report to you do. Ultimately, you want to have good leaders. So good supervisors don't necessarily need to know how to do the job or be really good at the job, but rather they seek to learn where further advice and instruction are needed by the people they supervise. So they're there to be a coach and to provide tools for the folks who work for them. So categories of different supervisory expectations can be generally identified under 4 major categories. So being there as the supervisor to prepare or orient a volunteer to their new volunteer job, providing ongoing support and resources. Usually there's some sort of reporting involved where you're either reporting on, so a big one for us is reporting on volunteer hours, but also on progress along the way. If you do any sort of reporting on metrics or anything like that, supervisors are often the ones who pull that together. And then ongoing evaluation. So as a supervisor of volunteers, that may include doing satisfaction surveys with your volunteers or with your stakeholders, with your other supervisors. Generally seeing, are we getting the right return on investment that we want in working with volunteers? Are our programs going well? Are we getting what we need? So that said, these tasks often fall to a lot of different people in an organization, especially when we're talking about volunteers. So if you're looking at your own organization, who among you is responsible for supervising the volunteers and interns? So you can go to Menti again, code 24349724, and then share. What is your role in supervising volunteers and interns versus where the responsibilities fall to others? You can see the pie chart coming in. All right. So yeah, it looks like pretty broad majority has you supervising some of them and others in the organization doing so as well. Of course, depending on the size of your organization and setup, in some cases, you might be supervising all of the volunteers and interns. Maybe you're not supervising folks at all. So kind of a diverse experiences here, but most of you are sharing the load with others. So next question, what is expected of staff who supervise volunteers? So again, you can go to Menti for this one. What are the things you have to do if you're supervising volunteers? And if you want a cheat sheet, you can go to your handouts, and I believe it is handout 2, has a lot of different tasks that a supervisor of volunteers might need to keep on top of. Leadership, check-ins, knowledge of programs, and if you prefer, you can again come off mute or go into the chat. Being on time, available, flexible, good communication. Let's see, consistency, leading folks, helping, got lots of good words here. Nice work. Encouraging, inspiring, consistency, holding folks accountable, checking work, creating, I think we got promoting. Yeah. Nice work. Thank you, everyone. So among all of the supervisory tasks, we'll dig in on a few of them. So if you are responsible for preparing a volunteer for their role or orienting them to their volunteer position, some of the examples of things that you might do as a supervisor include working to provide a welcoming and inclusive work environment and building a relationship with the volunteers so that you understand their needs. You might be the one who reviews and provides job descriptions. You might be the one who goes through the job responsibilities or the position description with your volunteer. Supervisors are often the ones who introduce volunteers and staff who will be working together. Preparing the work area, that's huge. Before a volunteer comes in, do they have everything they need? Do they have a place to sit? Do they know where they're going to be working? Good supervisors will also explain to a new volunteer how they will be supervised and where they can go to get any questions they have addressed. During that orientation, it's also important for a supervisor to discuss any relevant risk management issues, policies, procedures, anything that a volunteer needs to know to ensure that they remain compliant, that they do their job well, and that they keep everyone safe. Supervisors should also provide some sort of training for the volunteer if you don't have a separate volunteer training program. Supervisors also should provide ongoing support and resources. So that might look like providing ongoing training, providing information ongoing, and generally being there to support your volunteers. Coaching is huge, so we'll talk a little bit more about that in this module. Providing consistent informal appreciation of your volunteers in addition to formal appreciation. So making sure they feel appreciated and recognized for their time. And understanding, so I know it's a different module altogether to think through volunteer recognition in this series, but really huge. The supervisor has that one-on-one understanding of what's actually going to motivate a volunteer so that they can cater their recognition to that individual volunteer. Ongoing, the supervisor provides materials and information to support the volunteer in doing their job. Also really important for the supervisor to be there to address any issues around equity and inclusion, both with volunteers and in their partnership with staff. Reporting. This is my least favorite, I have to say, although it's super important because of the way my brain works. Reporting, metrics, numbers, etc. Not great at it, but super important for supervisors to keep this on their top priorities. So some examples of reporting requirements, if you're talking about volunteers, include individual and overall volunteer hours, the impact of volunteer work. Chances are, if you have a director of volunteers or anyone else in leadership, you might be compiling reports. The supervisor might be compiling various reports to whoever is aggregating them. Also, a lot of opportunities to gather and provide feedback between the volunteer and the supervisor. So two-way feedback. We'll talk about performance reviews today as well. Supervisors are also accountable for evaluating. So different things for us to evaluate include feedback to volunteer on their work and the impact of it. Anything on the experience of the volunteer with the organization or their program. Supervisors might be there to provide any written documentation of issues that pop up for any volunteers, as well as annual written evaluation of overall volunteer work within the organization, kind of like as an annual report. So also evaluation, measuring your impact is another complete different module in this series where you can really dig in on the power of program evaluation to boost your the effectiveness of your volunteer programs. So we're going to go back to Menti, do another quiz. So menti.com.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's pause here.
On that last screen, the last one where it says annual evaluation. So that report, annual report style document, that report, it probably needs to like be in that volunteer's file, and maybe give them a copy also. Or
yeah, so if you're doing some sort of annual or whatever the cadence is, if you're doing some sort of overall evaluation of your volunteer program, it may not be essential to put it in each volunteer's file. That would be more like if you're doing an individual performance evaluation with them, that would probably go in their personnel file. But absolutely, you should share it with your volunteers. So if you're compiling everything about your volunteers throughout the year, it could be like how many hours they put in, how many, I'm thinking of the myriad things volunteers can do. So like if they're attending group sessions, if they're providing coaching and mentoring, there are lots of different things you can count, or you can either measure quantitatively or qualitatively. So counting actual numbers of things or telling stories about impact. So anything that you think would be useful information for your volunteers, for yourself, for your organization, for your leadership, for your funders. Those are the sorts of things that you might put into some sort of annual evaluation or like annual reports of your volunteer program. And then absolutely, you should share that with the volunteers.
Okay,
So
thank
that's a
you.
really good question. Yeah. And I don't know if you've had it yet, but there's a measuring impact module in this series that goes way into depth on all of this stuff. So we're just barely brushing the surface here, and we'll mostly spend time on performance evaluations today. So we will definitely move on to that. And like I said, that's the thing that you would definitely file in their personnel file. Any other questions before we move on? That was a really good one. Okay, then back to Menti, code 24349724. So get ready, it'll be timed. Do competent supervisors of paid versus unpaid volunteer staff share key skills and characteristics? So if you're thinking of someone who supervises paid people versus volunteers, do they have nothing in common? Or yeah, people who supervise volunteers versus paid staff have some common skills. So what would be your guess? Nice job. That is the correct answer. All right. Frosty back up into the lead. Nice job. That leads us into the second concept. Spoiler alert, competent supervisors of both staff and volunteers share key skills and characteristics. So it is a little different to supervise volunteers versus paid staff, but not that different actually. So we're gonna go through basically how supervisors of paid and unpaid staff, so volunteers, share a lot in common. But really folks who work with volunteers need to really excel at what they're doing. I would say potentially even more than those of paid staff, because volunteers can more readily leave the organization if they're not satisfied or not having a good experience. So in other words, if you supervise volunteers, you're awesome, you really do a lot, and you really hold a lot of responsibility for the success of your organizations. So from here, think through a great supervisor you've had. So it could be someone who supervises you now, or someone who supervised you in the past. What were some of the skills that they had that made them a good supervisor? And what were some of their more general personal qualities? So you can think of it both in terms of skills like communication skills, or you could think of it in terms of personal qualities like they were just nice, right? And we're going to go to Menti again. And you can share them at Menti, or if you want to come off mute or in the chat, you can share that way as well. So think back on your favorite supervisors. What was it about them that made them so great? Trusted me, flexible, great listener, kind, fair and strict, supportive, positive, encouraging, great listener, sees strengths. Awesome, very good. Non-offensive. Now, see, this is where the word cloud gets me. We've got a lot of words here, but hopefully you can all see them here. I'll try to read them as they come in. Sure of themselves and of me, strategic leader, approachable, caring, inspiring, solution-oriented, always willing to learn, non-judgmental, enthusiastic, reliable, hands-off, compassion, not a butt. I love that we're using that description for folks, that you're a butt or not a butt. Calm, loving. So yeah, these are all great examples. Seeing a lot of fair, encouraging, and positive too, coming up to the top here. Wonderful. Okay, so think of all of those skills and qualities. You can also look at handout 3. In your handouts has more skills of good supervision and personal qualities of a good supervisor, in addition to what we shared already: cultural competency, a team builder, trainer and teacher, conflict resolution, delegation, planning, coaching, listening, setting standards, sharing knowledge, setting the climate, doing evaluation and review, problem solving, managing confrontation, trustworthy, models good behavior, self-reflective, empathetic. So if you think of all of these, which of these come easily to you? What stuff are you already good at? Both strict and kind, sharing knowledge, problem solving, and managing confrontation. And again, you can either use Menti or come off mute or go in the chat. Dealing with crisis, hands-on, empathetic, problem solving.
I sure would like to talk to the person who said that good at handling confrontation. I might.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's my struggle
Absolutely.
right there.
Yeah, hands on. So, and not to put anyone on the spot, whoever said they're good at managing confrontation, do you have any tips that you want to share?
I have a really good boss myself, and she does an excellent job at managing a crisis center that's staffed with 18 recovery coaches. And I was also employed there for about 6 months at the beginning of my career. So just getting that hands-on experience as a recovery coach in that atmosphere has translated into my position now.
Awesome.
So just really being mindful of not escalating things and just figuring out where the miscommunication is, because 9 times out of 10, that's what it is.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and some of it too is some of it too is just experience doing it. I think it's never easy, but I think you can gain some skills and you can learn along the way. So I think, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the performance management part later on. I think the key is just not to avoid it, because that's a lot of people are really conflict avoidant. And not only does that not help problems, but you also don't get the experience in learning how to manage them. But I think just understanding it's never going to be easy, and approaching every conflict with a growth mindset and understanding that you may not get it perfect, but you're going to learn along the way, can really help to make you feel a little bit more comfortable and giving it a try. Let's see, what else? Hands-on, empathetic, dealing with crisis, problem solving, listening and supportive, mitigating discourse and not afraid of confrontation. I strive to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, clean, brave, and irreverent. That is great. I love that. Healthy boundaries. Yep, super important. Okay, so these are all the things that we're all feeling like, okay, we're pretty good at these things. Now think through the skills. What are some skills and qualities of supervision that you think you need to work on improving, or you'd like to do more of so that you can get better at it? So what are some things where you're like, I haven't had much practice with that, or that's a thing I tend to avoid because I don't feel like I'm very, intuitively good at it? There we go, confrontation. What else? Direction. One of the things about direction too, I think for me, it's been a learning curve to understand, like, here's my style for giving direction, and here's what I think is the best way to do it. But then when you look at all the people you're supervising, they all have different styles as well. And some people want you to be really, really hands-off and not give a ton of direction. Some people really need that to guide them along the way. So I think being very, always being receptive and learning, what's the best way to support someone, especially given that it may change from day to day or from project to project or over time. All of them. Supervising is constant improvement, absolutely. De-escalating, disciplining staff, the drama cycle, evaluating and providing honest feedback, listening for what the real problem is. Yes. Yes, yes. It seems it's never so direct that you know that someone comes to you and says, this is exactly what the problem is. It sometimes requires a little more investigation. Awesome. Thank you all. So I mentioned that coaching is huge to supervision. It's a way of treating and managing people, builds awareness and responsibility in others, It allows the person who's being coached to accomplish tasks in a way that makes sense to them. So you're not really managing them and their, the odds and ends of what they need to do, but rather just answering their questions, providing support and encouragement and troubleshooting along the way. So then they can kind of figure out how to build their own path. Training someone instructs them to do things the way the other person does them, whereas coaching allows them to figure out solutions themselves. So sometimes maybe you do need to train someone because there's a very specific way something needs to be done, but really think through, like, is that true? So like I work in healthcare, there are some things where you do need to give them training because there may only be, very limited ways that you can perform a lab test or very limited ways that you can perform an exam. But even then, there's still a little bit of wiggle room as long as you're remaining in compliance. So maybe train people to the things that they must do in a certain way or a certain order, but then coach them to figure out how to bring their own nuance and do it effectively. So in addition to that, if you look at handout 4, tips to strengthen coaching skills. Some of the questions that are listed in there that you can talk through. Basically, the key to coaching volunteers is to help them realize their potential while optimizing their individuality and their uniqueness. It encourages ownership on the part of your volunteers to be better aware of the program and how it works. It kind of opens up the door for them to share their perceptions with you rather than just ticking off you telling them how to do something. And it also helps them assume responsibility to carry out the commitment to do the work. So basically, you can walk through some of these questions on handout 4 in talking through basically doing a coaching conversation with a volunteer. So some of the questions that they share, basically staying away from why questions. So rather than you saying to a volunteer, like, why did you screw this up? Or someone says, why is it this way? Think through what, when, who, how much, how many questions. So some of the sample questions are, what do you want to or need to accomplish? What will you do to get it done? What is your timeline, or when are you going to do it by? What obstacles do you think you might meet along the way? Who needs to know about what's going on? What support do you need? How and when are you going to get that support? What other considerations do you have? And then rate on a 1 to 10 scale the certainty you have that you'll carry out the actions and what prevents you from being at a 10. So those are just some examples of ways that you can dig in and really coach someone in rather than manage their work. So if you look through those questions, are there any questions not listed that you've either found useful in coaching other people, or that maybe a supervisor's asked you? A big one that my supervisors always ask is just, how can I help? So rather than saying, is everything okay? Yes or no. Staying away from yes and no questions is huge. How can I help? That makes me think, as the supervisee, really think through, what is the supervisor in what's in their power to do to, help move things along, opens up the door for if I'm running into any roadblocks. So anything else that you see missing here? Or does anyone have any questions about coaching? You can come off mute or share in the chat. Is there an area of our programs you'd be interested in learning more about? Yeah, absolutely. So talking about development and learning is huge for coaching folks. Maybe they have been brought in to do a very specific thing, but how can we expand on that to make sure that they're developing along the way? So that's great.
So Nikki, this is Cynthia.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be fair to ask, what's the experience that the volunteers are able to bring to the table? Because there might be something in their background and their experience that would help the program develop to a greater level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. So if you think through, like, here's everything we need you to do, but like, tell me about yourself. What are you good at? What are some skills that you've used in other situations? What are some skills that maybe you would like some additional time honing. So maybe you're not really good at something right now, but you would like to be. So what are those things? Absolutely. Or is there something you could even ask, like, okay, we brought you on to do this volunteer job, which just requires these skills. Are there other skills that we don't know about that have nothing to do with the job that, you know, we may or may not be able to use, but it would be useful to know about them? And that could open up lots of possibilities for like back pocket ways to work with volunteers. How do you learn best? That's great. Do you have any fears about the job or tasks? Yep. Who can help you? Yep. That's huge. I like to go through red, yellow, green with folks. So if they're feeling cautious about something or uncertain about something, just go through and say, okay, this thing that you're being asked to do, where do you feel green? So where are you like full speed ahead, feeling really good and confident about this? Where are you yellow, which is kind of like a little uncertain. Maybe I have some outstanding questions, or I just need some tools or resources or help. And then where are you red, where you're just like, this feels like a non-starter. I'm digging in my heels. This terrifies me. I feel completely uncertain about this. And that can kind of help give words to how people are feeling about an overall concern or project that they have. What are your goals? How can I help you achieve them? Yes. These are all great. Thank you all. Let's see. Okay, we've got another quiz. So go back to Menti. You can use the code 24349724. All right, here we go. Answer fast again. What is a coach? Someone who solves your problems for you, an expert who always has all the right answers, a sounding board, facilitator, and awareness raiser. An ABC TV series starring Craig T. Nelson and Shelley Fabares. I think there are 2 right answers there. No one went with Craig T. Nelson on ABC. That's an old 80s thing. Yeah, so nice work. A sounding board, facilitator, and awareness raiser. What we don't, so basically, I know one of you picked an expert who always has all the right answers. Really, that's not what it takes to be an effective coach. You don't necessarily have to be an expert in everything, and you don't always have to have all the right answers. Rather, I think you just have to be coming to a situation with, again, a learning mindset and a willingness to help, rather than saying, I know the right answer and I'm ready to tell you what to do. And the ABC TV series was just a joke. Yes, thanks, Mike. All right. I put the coach theme song in my head, which I'm amazed I still remember. All right, nice work. Let's see who's pulling into the lead here. Trace Kim back up at the top. Frosty and pulling up behind again. Nice job. All right, any questions before we move on to the third concept? What do we do for time? Okay, so we have talked a little bit about how principles of supervising paid and unpaid folks can be pretty similar. However, in concept 3, we're going to talk about how supervising volunteers is actually unique in a lot of ways as well. So they're not exactly the same. So go to Menti again. What are some special aspects of supervising volunteers which make the process unique and sometimes more difficult than maybe supervising paid staff? So what's different about supervising volunteers? Yep, short-term work, high turnover, because it's not a job. Yeah, being, relying on something for a paycheck can be an excellent motivator. Lack of commitment, motivation of unpaid staff can be difficult. Since they're volunteers, they may not always be reliable. Yeah, and that's a tough one because I remember part of my job when I led volunteers and tried to make the sell to my colleagues to work with volunteers was I wanted to say they are reliable. They can be really reliable because people would be like, nah, I'd rather have a paid staff person do that. But ultimately, you can get volunteers who are very reliable, and there are ways you can supervise them and manage them to promote their reliability. But ultimately, since it's not a paid job, a lot of other things might come first, whether it's the need to get a paid job, family, friends, personal life, feeling too busy. So it is a balance to get the most out of their, how reliable they are and set realistic expectations. You can't just say, just do it. It's like herding cats. Reliable, sometimes not dependable. It's a little more flexible when you're volunteering. They don't always take direction. Yeah, that can be especially, so we'll talk about performance management in a second, but just thinking through, I think sometimes people have different expectations where, well, since you're not paying me, I don't need to listen to you, or I'm not accountable for my performance. Variable excitement and commitment, lack of follow through, offer 2-for-1 hours for community service work, keep Midland beautiful. Okay, anything else? Okay. So yeah, so basically you want to think through what are the unique challenges of supervising volunteers. I think you also in an earlier module had some information about understanding folks who have motivations for affiliation, achievement, or power and influence. So supervising those folks are a little different depending on how they are motivated. You also want to think through how you might need to support people based on their age or generation, any cultural identity or other differences. So you have to kind of cater your approach based on those sorts of parameters. So some of the other things that come up that are a little different in working with unpaid volunteers instead of paid staff. A lot of them work fewer hours or more part-time. Many may work at a distance. Volunteers are more free to leave if needs aren't met. They don't have to line up the next job first. Like I mentioned earlier, volunteers may not expect to be supervised. Well, a big challenge that a lot of folks have is, who is my supervisor when I'm a volunteer? So being sure they have some clarity around that can really help. A lot of folks who manage volunteers may not feel comfortable giving volunteers constructive feedback. Based on motivation, again, since people aren't motivated to be there by money, there are a lot of different motivational styles you need to tap into. And volunteers may need more flexibility in their scheduling as well. So now I have a question for you. This is our little break question, our fun question in Menti. Would you all like to take a 5-minute break, or do you want to power through and potentially end a little earlier? It's totally up to you all. So any thoughts, preferences, wishes? Can let your voice be heard. And if no one else speaks, you get to speak for the group, I guess. Okay, in the chat. Break, please. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. Thank you, everyone. Let's come back at 10:58. And in the meantime, in Menti, when you come back, which TV or movie supervisor do you wish you reported to? So I'll see you at 10:58. Okay, hopefully folks are coming back. All right, let's see what we have. Lots of Leslie, is it nope? Nope. I don't watch a lot of TV, but every time I ask this question, Leslie's very popular. Michael Scott always comes up too. Ron Swanson always comes up. Let's see what else. Glenn Close, Helen Mirren, Sean Connery, Olivia Benson from SVU. That's fun. So thanks everyone for playing. So moving on, any questions on anything we've covered so far before we move on to the next concept? I'll pause here for just a sec. Okay. Well, fourth concept. So you've probably noticed an ongoing theme here across all of these modules in the volunteer leadership series. And it appears again here. Basically, depending upon the volunteer opportunity, also depending upon like how formal your volunteer program is, your organization is, the opportunity is, the size and style of your organization, dependent upon a lot of things, your supervision systems and methods are going to be varied. So again, this is just giving you some ideas for how you can build in really strong supervision for your volunteers. But ultimately, you want to think about what's going to be appropriate for your organization. And then the most important thing is to build some structure around that and ensure that those systems are shared with your volunteers and staff so that you're setting up expectations and people know what to do. And then they're followed through on. So like we'll talk about performance management today. And like performance reviews, things like that, and like how to do like check-ins and one-on-ones. I think ultimately you want to figure out what system's going to work for you, but then actually do it. And I think a big thing, something that I ran into, so of course we came up with all of these formal systems for doing regular performance reviews with volunteers, and it was a two-way system where the supervisor evaluated the volunteer and the volunteer evaluated the supervisor, the organization, and the position. Like really great and robust programming. But ultimately no one ever did them. So it's a little like you have to be realistic about what's actually going to work for your volunteers and your programs. So we'll talk through all of that. So some different formal and informal ways to supervise volunteers. Formal ways of volunteers might include actually setting up one-on-one meetings that are on the calendar or happen at a regular cadence. You might have monthly group or individual meetings with your volunteers, a written annual review, so that performance review that I mentioned, any other formal ways that you all can think of supervising volunteers. Another one I can think of is if like I've heard of organizations where if the volunteer's kind of off working on their own, they have to submit some sort of like weekly or monthly report of what they've worked on. So that would be a way of supervising them. And then some, so feel free to throw in the chat if you have any other examples of formal ways to supervise volunteers. We'll move on to informal. Less formal ways to supervise them include open time for scheduling appointments. So like office hours, where the volunteers know you're available. And if they want to talk to you, they can throw something on the calendar or stop by. Supervision just by walking around, or like in healthcare, that's called rounding, where you're just kind of walking around, asking questions, chatting with people, getting kind of a temperature check just by being present and talking to folks more informally. You might also have regular reports, phone calls, or emails to and from volunteers working off-site. So just checking in, how's everything going? Sharing feedback from staff and clients might be a less formal way of supervising them. Any other examples you all want to share? Okay. Communicating obviously is key to supervising volunteers. So I'm going to ask you to go to Menti again, use the code 24349724. How often would you say that you use these different methods of communication with your volunteers? So on the left, you can pull the little why am I'm losing the word, but the little slider to the left, if you do things always or very frequently. Oh, this is wrong. Strongly agree. I didn't do this right. Always or strongly agree. So we'll see how this goes. Specific appointment at designated times, open time for scheduling appointments or office hours, regular monthly, weekly, or group or individual meetings, rounding, reports. So that was supposed to be, I think, always very frequently on the left and then never on the right. So I really screwed up this poll. I'm sorry. I pulled over my questions and I think they didn't update. So yeah, if you want to do it that way, if you do things all the time, pull it to the left. If forget the strongly agree, if you never do these things, pull it to the right. All right, so looks like a lot of frequency of specific appointments at designated times, regular monthly, weekly, group, or individual meetings. Little less often do we do open time or office hours. Cool, thank you. Really messed that one up, Nikki. So any questions on formal and informal opportunities to supervise volunteers? We just covered that concept real quickly. The big takeaway is you can be flexible as long as you know what's going to work for you, your supervisors, your organization, and the volunteers, and then set those expectations, those parameters clearly, and actually follow through on them. So performance reviews. I promised you that we would talk about performance reviews, which are an opportunity for open dialogue between a volunteer and their supervisor. So, show of hands in Menti again. Do you have a policy or process in place for doing performance reviews with your volunteers and interns? Yes, there's Joey yelling yes. Nope, not at all. There's a happy little like skipping goat saying nope, nope, nope. Kind of, or I don't know. Shrugging Tom the cat. So do you all do performance reviews? Do you have a process in place or expectations that they get done? Looks like minority is in yes, and then even split between no and not sure, kind of. Very good. Yeah, and I think when I was thinking back on ours, we did have a policy and process in place for doing them. So I would be like, yes, but then if I thought through, did people actually do them? No, not at all. So yeah, so ultimately you want to think through, if you're doing performance reviews, make sure that it's a system that people will have time to do and will take seriously. But generally they're really good to do. It's a really good opportunity to build in, to set mutual expectations, do a temperature check, make sure everyone's happy. So they're an opportunity to, for feedback, it should be mutual. So not only are you evaluating the volunteer, but the volunteer should be able to kind of mirror back and say, like, this is going well for me as, with you as my supervisor, the program, the work I'm doing, the organization, but here are some things where I'm running into challenges or would like to see some change. Again, they can be formal or informal. So you could sit down and do something in writing with forms and paperwork, which is what, again, we tried to do, but it wasn't working because it was too long. No one spent the time doing it. We didn't do follow-up to make sure they got done. So we eventually just moved to like an online survey, where we could kind of, we would push it out to all the volunteers at certain intervals. They would kick it back to us. And basically, if there were any issues that popped up, then we would do a little more follow through with them. So next quiz, do you do two-way reviews where, so if you are doing performance reviews, not only does the supervisor review the volunteer, but the volunteer has an opportunity to give feedback to the supervisor? Yep, nope, sometimes. Nope, 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 I love it. So generally, again, so figure out what's going to work for your organization. You want to make sure that you have something built in, even if it is really informal or really casual, that there is some sort of opportunity built in that volunteers and supervisors know how to access, so they know they have it in their toolkit to give each other feedback. And generally, so lots of options. You can do them in writing, you can do them in person, you can do them online via a survey. Think through the cadence. Do you do them, like, good opportunities to do them would be like at when you're, if you're interested in retaining volunteers and there's a point at which a lot of volunteers leave, maybe start doing surveys before that. So if you're like, okay, we have no problem getting volunteers in the door, we have no problem keeping them for about 3 months, but it seems at the 6-month point, they all fall off. So it might be good to do a survey around month 3, 4, 5, so that you can see like what's changing then, and get some feedback to make some improvements if you want to retain people longer than that. Another option would be to do them at anniversaries beyond that. So like at each volunteer's annual anniversary, or like in our program where we just weren't keeping up on making sure that people had them. We'd originally said, I think we would do them at 30 and 90 days and 12 months and then annually thereafter. There was no way for thousands of volunteers, and then I was the only person managing it, that we were going to get that done. So we basically moved to every year we do, we give supervisors the paperwork and say, here are the tools, and we would like you to do these sorts of conversations with your folks after they've started, and every year. But we only formally we just pushed out a survey every year. So everyone got the same survey at the same time every year. So think through what timing's going to work for you, how routinely you get them. Does everyone get them, or do you maybe just segment them to certain volunteers? That's another way to keep it manageable. If you have a volunteer position that's maybe more like high intensity, they stay longer, they have more responsible work, you want to retain them longer, requires more training, more hands-on with your clients, that might be an opportunity where you're like, okay, we're going to give them performance reviews. But maybe if you have volunteers that are pretty like in and out, not a lot of training, not very hands-on, maybe they don't need a performance review. How do you follow up on results? Again, do they review their supervisor and vice versa? Ultimately, though, you want to make sure that they're not threatening, that they're constructive, they're supportive, that it's a flexible format, and that they're empowering. So you want to aim to encourage your volunteers to stretch for high standards and determine, again, those coaching questions of how and what and who, determine where the organization can help the volunteer achieve their goals. The biggest thing with performance reviews, though, is that there should be no surprises. So effective coaching is where you're giving feedback and giving, troubleshooting through problems and sharing, I'm seeing you're running into this challenge. Here's how I'd like you to pivot and we can work towards this. That should be happening every day. For me, the performance review should never be a surprise. And that shouldn't be the opportunity where once a year you're giving someone bad news that they're not performing well. They should know about it continuously because it's so important to give timely feedback and not just hold it for, the end of the year when you're doing all of your performance reviews. So we'll run through some key aspects of doing these things. So different elements of the performance review include, first of all, you want to make sure whatever your system is, volunteers learn about it when they're first oriented to the organization. Really good to have volunteers not only give the volunteers feedback, but for them to give feedback about their experience to the organization. We talked about position descriptions in a different module. Really important that the reviews are based on previously agreed upon job descriptions, standards, etc. So they're not being surprised with expectations they've never heard of before. Speaking of which, no surprises, especially negative surprises. If they need to improve on things or they're already doing really well, they should know about that every day. Process can be formal or informal, whatever works the best for you and your volunteers. They can take many forms. So again, if it doesn't make sense to do like a written formal performance review on a regular cadence, you might do things like all volunteer surveys, group feedback sessions, etc. And ultimately, you want to document when the review takes place to ensure regular check-ins. So what do you have, like people need to have expectations in writing so they can know what to do and know what to expect. So back to Menti, if we're talking about, okay, what sorts of performance review process can we sustain as an organization? What's going to be helpful to us versus something that we can't manage? Think through ultimately, what do you think are some benefits of even doing performance reviews? So you can go to Menti to enter in for our little word cloud, or if you want to come off mute or on the chat, that is welcome as well. So why should we do these things? They're onerous, we forget to do them. So why should we do them anyway? Good opportunity to check in on strengths versus weaknesses, overall success, confidence boost, absolutely. Improves volunteer positions over time, puts everyone on the same page. Again, everyone on the same page about what's going on, helps team members grow. Documentation, which is huge, opportunity to document accomplishments, do needs assessments, and people don't know what they don't know. Absolutely. Awesome, awesome. So cool. So yeah, big takeaway, figure out what works best for your organization, understand what value you're trying to get out of them, both for the volunteer, for the supervisor, for the organization, and for the impact that you're looking to make on the work that you do. We've got a few other reasons. Understand how to improve, encourage communication, evaluate the volunteer program. Yeah, absolutely. So figure out like what benefit are you looking to get out of this? And then figure out what's doable. Maybe consult with if you don't have a performance management process right now, consult with your existing volunteers and supervisors to see like what would be feasible for them. Because you also don't want to roll out something that no one's going to want to do because they haven't been brought along. So talk to them, think about what would be helpful as well as what would be actually sustainable for them to do. And then make sure it's documented and that you're actually developing some sort of rigor around it so that you're not developing this huge program that then no one remembers to do and no one ever uses and it never gets executed. More info. So building on what you already shared for benefits of volunteer performance reviews, recognition that volunteer work is being noticed. And that is sometimes, I think for supervisors of volunteers, I think it's easy to take your volunteers for granted because they're there and they're doing the work and they may seem happy. And so it is a really good way to sit down and force ourselves to take stock of all the great work that volunteers have been doing and share it with them. A time to express appreciation also. Opportunity to offer volunteer leadership positions. So someone mentioned earlier that that talking and supervising with volunteers, talking with volunteers is an opportunity to think through what skills do you have that we're maybe not using right now? So it is a really good opportunity to talk through where do you see yourself? What skills would you like to work on or use that you're not currently using? You're doing a great job in this volunteer position. Would you like to be elevated to supervise other volunteers? So it's an opportunity to do that. Learn about and improve their experience. It's a motivational check-in. So I know in the volunteer motivation module, we talk a lot about what motivates people to come to volunteer positions and what motivates them to stay. But also that changes over time. So like I had a volunteer who started, I started managing our volunteer programs right out of college, and she was maybe a year or two ahead of me in college. So we were both real young. And she came in, I think, because she, didn't go where she wanted to go after college, felt like she was kind of in a dead-end job, and really had a passion for doing sex ed. And so she was like, I didn't do an internship in college to figure all this stuff out. I would like to come in and do an internship with you while I'm, she was working a retail job. So that was her motivation to begin with. She wanted to get some experience doing sex ed because she wanted to do that like potentially as a career. So that was in her early 20s. Then she got married, had some kids, got really busy, so had to draw back and basically just really liked the organization. She's like, well, I can't do an internship anymore. I'm too busy, but can I just come in, one Saturday a month for a couple hours to help you with a training? Absolutely. And then as things continued to evolve over time, we basically changed her because I would check in with her regularly. We would change what she would do. So she ended up, I think she's still volunteering with the organization like almost 20 years later. And because we had shifted her around, try different things, you can come in and volunteer regularly or just drop in a couple times a year, and really went with whatever her life presented and what she was interested in. And finally, a year or two ago, I heard from her again. Her kids are a little bit older now. And she was like, I kind of lost track of the fact I wanted to be a sex educator when I was younger. So can I talk about doing an internship again? So the fact that we always had those check-ins allowed us to evolve with her needs over the years and retain her for a very long time. Also, it's an opportunity to discuss and address performance challenges, of course, and just an open door for volunteers to give feedback on how you can improve your volunteer program, but also the organizational culture, the training that you're providing, etc. So I think this is supposed to be challenges of volunteer performance reviews. So some of the challenges which we've talked through, it can be difficult for larger organizations to connect with every volunteer for performance reviews. So again, think about when you're coming up with your program, how can you scale it appropriately? It's time consuming for staff. So again, if you're coming up with your program, talk to staff about what they actually have capacity to do. Doing them may not make sense or be possible for one-time or short-term opportunities. So maybe you preserve them for the volunteer roles where people are around longer. They may be perceived as overbearing or unwelcome if done too formally. So that's the importance of bringing the volunteers along and setting the expectations up front. So if you have a lot of long-term volunteers in your organization, you don't have a performance review process, and all of a sudden you drop one in their lap, you're probably going to get pushback. So be sure to involve them in the process of building the program, and then also set the expectations for all of your new volunteers of how you do them so that they don't get seen as being overbearing or too formal, or, why are you scoring me on something for which I'm not paid? You have to really explain the why behind it. So, it's just, we really value your time and contributions. We treat you like, you're just as important to us as our paid staff who we do evaluate. So this is just a way of formalizing this and making sure that we hear from you, that we give you the resources and information you need to do your volunteer job the best you can, and that you have a regular built-in opportunity to provide us with feedback as well. And that makes a better sell for the whole thing than just saying, we're going to evaluate your performance every year. It may be particularly true for volunteers who regularly help informally in their communities. So folks who maybe, are accustomed to just helping out without the structure of a volunteer program. So the example they give here, would a neighbor evaluate your performance after you helped shovel their sidewalk? So think through that as well and explain. So that's where you're thinking through what are the benefits of doing evaluation and being sure that you understand, like, why are we doing this? And make the sell, explain that why to the volunteers and make sure it's actually appropriate. It could also put up a barrier for volunteers who have anxiety or those who worry about their value to the organization. So again, that's where it's just so important to share the why and to say that it is really a time to check in to make sure you're happy with the organization, and that we're giving you the information that you need. And we have an opportunity to talk about your development. And is this still the volunteer role you want to have, or do you want to move into something else? And another way that you could potentially frame it, if you think calling them performance reviews would, cause people to bristle a little bit, you might call them stay interviews. So that's something that a lot of organizations and companies do outside of like a performance review, which sounds so strict and sounds like you're scoring someone. A stay interview is more about, we want to talk about your value to the organization. What can we do for you to make you want to stay here, and to make you get the most value out of this opportunity and this experience? What tools and resources do you need? We're going to give you feedback on everything you're doing really well. And here are the places where maybe you've had some challenges, and I'd like to talk through how we can make that even better. So we're kind of cruising through here. So again, takeaway, they can take a lot of different shapes. It may even vary from one volunteer to another. So you might even consider offering volunteers a choice between a more formal review of their experience or an informal conversations about how things are going. So that's another tactic you could use if you have some flexibility, is letting people pick. So that's another thing to consider as well. Back to Menti, we're going to do another quiz to keep us moving along. So go back to menti.com, use the code 24349724. These are a surprise to me. I forget what the quizzes even are. Okay. Is it ever okay to fire a volunteer? What do you think? No, they're not being paid. You can't dismiss them. This makes me uncomfortable. I'd rather not talk about it. Yes, sometimes it's a necessary part of addressing performance issues. Which one do you think it is? And hopefully our former president telling you you're fired isn't a trauma cue for anyone. Yes, see, this makes me uncomfortable and I'd rather not talk about it, that is acknowledging the reality, because it's true. But yes, sometimes it is okay to fire a volunteer. It's sometimes a necessary part of addressing performance issues. So let's see where we landed on that. Nice job again. So yes, we're going to talk through different approaches for addressing difficult volunteer performance issues. And so basically, we are moving into the uncomfortable territory of conflict, of potential confrontation, of delivering feedback. And ultimately, we want you to just get comfortable with understanding that it's a normal part of coaching someone, right? And hopefully, in most circumstances, you'll have given people feedback along the way, sufficient enough that you're not dropping a bomb on them to say, you've been performing terribly and now we're going to let you go, or you did something terrible and now we're going to let you go. But rather that it's been a coaching situation where you've had two-way feedback and conversations, you've tried some things, you've documented these conversations, and then maybe it gets to the point where it's like, you know, maybe this isn't the right fit anymore. But ultimately, there are a lot of different approaches to dealing with this, and hopefully it will very, very rarely end with you quoting Donald Trump and saying you're fired. So I'm curious, back to Menti again, have you ever had to dismiss or terminate a volunteer? So yes, I have, and I lived through it. I have, but it was awful. No, I've never had reason to. No, but I probably should have. And then other. All right, great. Well, it looks like a lot of folks have, I mean, you're all here right now. So you did live through it. Hopefully you learned from it. A few folks who just haven't run into a reason to do so, which is also fine. I think we're all in this boat. No, but I probably should have once or twice. I'm probably in the yes, I've lived through it and I should have done more of them. That's where I would score myself. So basically, if you're addressing performance issues, some rules of thumb, you don't want to attack someone's personality, focus on their performance. So talk about don't talk about, you know, things like you have a bad attitude, or you come in and you're grumpy, or you don't listen. Talk about specific things that in their performance that they're doing or not doing. And be as specific as possible. So do your homework and have specific examples of the behavior to share. One thing that I ran into when I was leading our volunteer programs was I wasn't supervising most of the volunteers, my colleagues were, and they would come to me and say things like, yeah, could you just get rid of this volunteer? They have a bad attitude. They don't seem to like it here. No one likes it when they're here. We just want you to get rid of them. And I'm like, no, we don't do that. Like, talk about specifically, have you given them feedback about specific things in their behavior or their performance? And if you need me to help you, like, give me some examples of what they're doing. Or if you don't have them yet, sometimes I would send them back and say, you need to do your homework. Keep the conversations private. Obviously, with any like HR type personnel issues, you want to keep it on a completely need to know basis, just between you, the volunteer, and the volunteer supervisor if you're not the supervisor. Make the intervention timely, but don't approach them until you're calm. So maybe not great to, if you're in the heat of the moment and dealing with an issue, go out and try to talk to them about it, but don't wait too long. Make sure that it's close enough in proximity to the event that they're not continuing to exacerbate whatever the behavior is, and you can remember the details, and so they can as well. So it doesn't seem like you're coming out of nowhere. And as always in dealing with conflict, it's really important to use I and not you language, and to be very clear about what the behavior is that you're expecting. Another thing that I have found useful is to basically come together. If there are things that, if there's language or examples of ways that I can reinforce with someone the things they're doing well, that can help just kind of build trust and diffuse things a little bit. So just if there's any way you could talk about how much you value them, how much you value X, Y, and Z that they do, but then share, I'm observing, and then what are the things you're observing about them? I always build in what's the impact of that. So it's not just about, I don't like that you do this thing, like what's the actual impact of it? So like, you know, I'm noticing that you come in late and consistently come in late, and the impact is that our clients have to wait around to be helped, or, you know, other folks who work here have to pitch in until you arrive, and that's stressful for them. Or we just don't know when to expect you'll be here, and so it makes a lot of uncertainty and it's hard for us to plan. So share what the impact is as well. And then from there, think through, basically from there, I'll talk about, you know, what I would like to see is you arriving on time. So this is the time you need to show up. I'd like to see you start coming then, and let's check in. Usually I say like, I'll document it with them, and I'll say, let's check in a week or two or whatever makes sense, to see if, you know, to just see if you've had any questions. Has anything come up? Have you been able to improve? And then from there, give them the opportunity to, like, if there's a reason to state their case, if they disagree, and say, well, actually, like, I don't see it that way, to give some space for that. And to talk through if there are any, you know, again, the coaching stuff. How can I support you? What tools do you need? Is there different information you need? Maybe they just didn't have, like, the expectations weren't set for them, so they didn't know. So all of that is, I have found to be really helpful. So other things you can do, so get agreement on the problem, allow them to share their own perspectives, see if you can come to a consensus on what's going on, determine a shared commitment for finding a solution to the problem. So what do you need as their supervisor, and then what are they also committing to do? Agree on a mutual plan to solve the problem, and arrange for a follow-up meeting to determine if the issue is resolved or needs an alternate solution. So the way that I usually put that is just, rather than, you know, I'm going to meet with you in 2 weeks so we can make sure you've resolved this, I'll just say like I feel like an even softer way to say that is, I would like you to be, you know, showing up on time for the next 2 weeks. And I just want to check in with you in a couple of weeks to see how it's going. Rather than I'm going to follow up with you to make sure you've done this. Let's just put some time on the calendar so we can check in to see, like, have you run into challenges? How's everything going? Etc. And then really important to document the conversation as well. Even if in some cases, like, I may follow up with an email to someone so that they have the documentation of what our conversation was and what the expectation is. Depending on the situation and the style of your organization, it can also just be helpful to document it, whether it's for your own files or for their personnel file. So if they continue to have problems, you can go back and revisit that and show that you've had these conversations along the way. So prior to firing someone, there are a lot of different options you can do. So maybe the position's just not right for them. Maybe if they're showing up late every day, it's because it's a program that starts at 7 a.m. They're not a morning person, and you're like, hey, let's check out this 1 p.m. opportunity. So reassign them to a new position that's more suitable. Train, coach, retrain them. You might provide a more motivating climate if they've lost interest in the work or mission. So sometimes they're just kind of losing interest. So it's a good opportunity to check in and see where they sit on that. Sometimes if it's just not going to work in your organization, I find that it can be helpful and show that you value them and see their value in the community by giving them information on where they might find a better suited volunteer position with another organization. And then also, like, it's super important to think through if age, if ability, or any other life-changing circumstance is a factor, to come up with some sort of mutually agreed upon accommodation plan, because we want to make sure that we're accommodating folks no matter what's coming up in their lives. Any questions there before we move on to dismissing volunteers? The least fun part. Okay. So generally, I would say all of the rules that we just went through, I feel like if you follow through all of them pretty much to a T, they're really effective and can make what can seem like a scary and uncertain experience that we might want to avoid a little more palatable. So you can become, it can start to feel like a more intuitive part of coaching and being a supervisor, rather than something where you're like, brush it under the rug, brush it under the rug, brush it under the rug, which doesn't help anyone in the long term. So ultimately, if all your options fail or an infraction is extremely serious, sometimes if someone, puts someone in harm's way or seriously violates some sort of policy of your organization or a regulatory policy that you're expected to abide by, it may be in everyone's best interest to simply dismiss them. So think through, I'm curious, in your organization, and I don't know if that, no Menti there. So you can put this in the chat or come off mute for a bit and we'll have a little discussion. In your organizations, what action might warrant a warning to a volunteer and or like a straight up a dismissal? So looking for you all to share some examples. And I can start. Any sort of like abuse or harassment, that's pretty much zero tolerance. So that's something where right away we would dismiss them after. I mean, we'd have to do an investigation, but that would be a dismissal. Harassment from chat, thank you, Will. Substance use, Cynthia, thank you. Laura, warning. Someone might get a warning if they have poor boundaries with the people we serve. A dismissal if anyone puts someone in physical danger. Folks who gossip all the time. Yep, it's confidentiality is another really big one. That's if someone is in violation of our confidentiality policy, that would generally turn into a dismissal. Sexual harassment, stealing. All right, great examples, everyone. So the steps to go through when dismissing a volunteer. So basically some key steps to follow through. Discuss the need to release them with your supervisor or whoever needs to give their support in making this decision. So are you empowered to make those decisions on your own? Or is there anyone else who needs to be in the know? Do you need to consult with, like, if you have an HR department or an HR, any sort of entity, an HR person, do you need to consult with them? Do you have a legal department or any legal entity that consults with you? Do you have security? Sometimes it's important to just give security a heads up if you're going to be having this conversation. Also, another big one, if they have some sort of other relationship with the organization, you may need to notify some other folks. So like I've had to dismiss someone who was a donor before. So when that happens, I would contact our fundraising department to give them the story, the background, so that if they hear about it, they kind of know what happened. So anyone else who you think needs to know, the staff who work with them, if you're going to notify staff who don't need to be in the know or other volunteers, keep it really simple. Don't go into detail. Just say that they're no longer volunteering with you. From there, you might want to make sure that they have an official warning letter. That's where, so depending on how serious the infraction is, if they had some sort of warning, make sure that it was documented somewhere, what behavior needed to change and by when. If possible, provide assistance to help the volunteer change their behavior. Again, if it's not too serious of an infraction, and document those changes over time. Again, ask them for feedback on any resources they may need. Sometimes you might give them some sort of probation with special goals along the way, so they know exactly what they should be looking for. And then if those goals aren't achieved, that would be when you would consider a dismissal. So obviously it seems so simple, right? If there's an arrow, you just go in the direction of the arrow and then you're good, right? Not really. So we know things don't always work this way, especially if you're pulled in when it's like too late and the supervisor maybe who's working with the volunteer hasn't done all of these steps and they're just like, we need this person gone. But these are really good things to strive for. And they tend to be really successful if they're executed in full. And so if you're not the only person supervising and other people make these decisions, it's good to set these expectations with them as well and say, like, this is a part of successful performance management. We don't want to just let things go until we dismiss someone. These are the ways to get to the point where you're doing some like probationary performance management.
I have one question about what about some way to help the volunteer figure out or decide that they need to move on? Like,
Yeah.
has anybody ever, did something like that.
Yeah, and that's where I think if you talk through like here's the behavior we're seeing, here's the behavior we're expecting, and you give them an opportunity to think through what would they need to do to fulfill those expectations and those goals. So like this probation with special goals, basically like if you can kind of in that moment say, do you agree to do these things? And if they say no, that might be like, well, maybe this isn't the right place for you. If they say yes, then you're giving them the opportunity to kind of buy in, to take some ownership of improvement. And then ultimately, if they don't do those things, then it's kind of like, well, you didn't do these things that we set up, so we're going to have to let you go. Does anyone else have any other examples of times that they've done what Linda just mentioned? I mean, I think it can kind of feel like a tricky dance, and where I think sometimes people can feel like if they're sending a message to the volunteer to try to get them to decide to leave, I think the caution I would have is that can come off as kind of like passive aggressive. And sometimes what you need to do is just be very direct about, here's the behavior we're seeing. This is what we need you to do. Here's how we can, how can I help you do those things? And then, I mean, to some extent it is their decision, but if you're coming up against a difficult or confrontational person, they may still say, this isn't my decision, you're pushing me out. But it's just like, these are the things we need you to do. And if you can't do those things, you can't be here. And we'll, best of luck to you. We've appreciated everything you've done, and just kind of graduate them from the program with dignity and appreciation and move them on.
Okay, I like that about the path. Now that kind of helps me to know that, yeah, I need to be more direct and not afraid to, not to be the one to make that decision. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think sometimes there's like, I've even run into like with colleagues who very clearly feel like they're being managed out, but no one is giving them specific feedback. And that's not a kind thing to do. It's not an effective thing to do. It's not an equitable thing to do. It doesn't create a positive climate for anyone. So I'd say generally you want to be as direct as possible, and avoid the, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Are you sure this is the right place for you?
Also, just as a heads up, maybe be a little aware of any mental health issues. We had to dismiss a volunteer here a couple of years ago because of an infatuation issue with one of our staff employees, but her mental health issue didn't allow for her to understand what was happening.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, that's huge. I've run into that as well. Is there anything that you learned in doing that you want to share with the group?
Delicacy, always.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and that's where, you want to be as kind as possible, and really just be as empathetic as possible and as appreciative as possible. But ultimately, like, sometimes you are just going to say, this isn't going to work and we need you to leave now. And they may not take that and say, okay, I agree with you, I see what I did wrong. So ultimately you may not be able to convince them of that. But just try to be as clear as possible, and as firm as possible, even though if you're being, empathetic and, sensitive to all of those things, sometimes you also do need to be firm and say, this is what we're doing now. and set that expectation for them.
Help to help her with that understanding. We brought in a gal from public health to help her understand what was going on. Yeah, she wasn't. It was going right over her head.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. That's a great example.
Yeah, I like that. Having somebody else, not just like me and the person, to have somebody pull somebody else in to witness it all or whatever, or to kind of, okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, and that's another great point too, is like, is there, depending on who's involved, Is there a trusted person by the person who's being dismissed, where they might feel more comfortable hearing it with them in the room, or next to them? Is safety a concern, in which case you do want to have someone else in the room with you? Is like compliance and legal accountability a concern, in which case you do want someone there just to witness it? So yeah, think through what's most appropriate. If you feel like none of those things are a concern and it's just kind of not the right fit, but you want to maintain a good relationship with the person, those things may seem too confrontational, and you may be fine just delivering the message to them individually. So think through in advance. This is why it's so important that you catch things well in advance. So hopefully you never have to get to the point where you're dismissing them, but also you have all the pieces in place, and it's not turning into a Friday at 5 p.m. Hey, can you come get rid of this volunteer? But rather, we know that they're on some sort of improvement plan over time. You know who needs to come to the table. You've done your documentation and your investigations over time. And that gives you like the clarity to really think in a clear-headed way about what's going on and get multiple perspectives. And then I would say just make sure everyone who needs to be involved is on the same page on that last day. Like I've come into some situations where similar to you all, where there were some mental health issues. We had a volunteer who'd been given improvement feedback for months and months and months and months and months, and still wasn't listening, and was very argumentative, and seemed to be even like bordering on some stalking behavior with our staff. It was just a bad situation. And so from my perspective, we needed to cut all ties with her from the organization. It was just not going to work anywhere. So I walked into the room ready to have that conversation. And I think the Minnesota nice, passive aggressive kind of person who was supervising her, in her mind, she was like, I just don't want her in my department anymore. So she was trying to be like the nice guy and say, oh, well, Nikki can find you a new place in the organization. You just can't do this position anymore. And I was like, no. And so in the moment, because we hadn't agreed to all of this in advance, she kind of took over the script and was like, well, Nikki could probably help you find somewhere else. And I was like, no, I can't. Not in this organization. I can refer you elsewhere to some place that can help you. But yeah, so it's really, really important to have everyone on the same page in advance. Okay, so I think, where are we now? A quiz, another quiz. So menti.com again, we'll do another quiz. Looks like we have 2 more. The following is not an important step in dismissing a volunteer. So not. What happened? Do it again. Lost it. Okay, which one of these is not a step in dismissing a volunteer? Consult with supervisor, HR legal is needed. Ensure you have a process. Don't put anything in writing ever. That's a liability. When possible, issue a written warning. Consider your zero tolerance behaviors that warrant immediate dismissal. Yes. So yeah, you do want to put things in writing. Could be a liability, but only if you're doing things that are illegal. So make sure that you're approaching things legally, and be sure it's in writing then, so that you can keep track of what has been said. If the volunteer has questions, and really, I don't want to jinx anyone, but I've never come into any discrimination issues or accusations of discrimination with volunteers or interns, but in theory you could. So that's where it's so important to have everything in writing along the way. Okay. Leaderboard. Nice work, everyone. Still those 3 up in the lead the whole time. Nice work. I'm not giving away any candy or anything. So quickly, we'll do a little discussion here. So role-playing scenario with the time we have left. You have a volunteer who was onboarded to provide kitchen assistance in your battered women's shelter. The volunteer was shown the position description and signed it. She was trained to do the work in the kitchen. After a few shifts, she found that she much more enjoyed playing with the children in the shelter. Instead of working in the kitchen, she would color with the kids. You have a policy stating that volunteers are not to interact with children as risk management. When you addressed the issue with her, she got upset and told you that children need people to interact with in a fun way, and she went back into the children's room. She also reminded you that she and her husband have been huge donors to the shelter for many years. So come off mute. What would you do in light of everything we just discussed?
Wow, I would go back to the agreement and say, okay, this is what we agreed that you were here to do. So what are we gonna do with it about this?
Mhm, mhm.
And see what her response would be on that,
Yeah.
know, and yeah, go from there.
Absolutely. Yes. Great. Yeah. That's the power of having that written position description that you review and they sign. You can always go back to it. So great example. Any other ideas? What else would you do?
Really
would-
address,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
Going to the issue of, her mentioning that she's a huge donor. Well, we thank you for your donations. We certainly appreciate them. The donation piece is not the relevant issue at hand.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
my group would do our best to come up with a volunteer position where she could work with the kids after an adequate background check, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. If there are opportunities to have her work with kids, absolutely change her position description. But you may still want to do some coaching and say, like, you need to work within the scope of your position description, and you can't go rogue on us. So make
Good
sure
luck
that you
with
address
she
that.
pulls out. Good luck with that. In my experience, if she's pulling out, I'm a big donor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, if there is an opportunity to put this person into a different position that might be more fulfilling, again, I would make sure, because this is a performance issue, that they're working outside of the scope and pushing back on you with that. So even if you are able to reassign them, I would address that performance issue and have that discussion and document it. But then absolutely, if there are opportunities for this person to work elsewhere in a way that's more fulfilling for them, go for it. Any other ideas? From the chat, from Laura, acknowledge she's right in the value of the children receiving positive interaction, but be direct in stating it as a liability issue and she cannot continue to represent our agency while doing this. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, anything you can do to be empathetic and share that you like, acknowledge that you're hearing them and you understand their rationale, but ultimately being very firm about this is why, this is the potential impact of your behavior. And so this is the behavior we need to start seeing out of you. And then basically just come up with a plan from there about, we've given you a warning. We acknowledge, so say we can't put her in a new position with kids. We've given you this warning. It's so imperative that you do not do this because it can put us, our organization, our clients at risk. So we need you to be in the kitchen within the scope of your job. No more infractions. We'll check in a couple weeks to see how you're doing. Even if it's not clearly like, we're going to check in to make sure you haven't talked to any kids. You could say in 2 weeks, we're just going to check in to see, because we need you in the kitchen. That's where we put you. It's where we have your job scoped. We'll check in 2 weeks to see if you're getting what you need out of that position. And if not, we can talk about where else we might be able to use you. Even if literally all you have is a kitchen job. From there, if that's not cutting it, you might say, we so appreciate your donations, and maybe that's the best way for you to support our organization right now. And that's where if the kitchen wasn't cutting it and we had nowhere else to put her, I might say, like, yep, so totally appreciate your donations. Let's go to the local like volunteer clearinghouse or database and see, like, look, there are a bunch of positions where you can play with kids, and I'll help you find those. Anything else on this one?
Yeah, I just think that's something, when you have someone that, like in this scenario, that she just totally blew off the person, telling her you need to be in the kitchen, just go ahead and do what you want to do. That's the confrontational thing.
Yep. And that's where, again, being very clear, being very direct, it helps everyone involved. It helps the organization, your liability. It helps build your authority as their supervisor. And it helps them maybe they've worked in places before where they've gotten away with doing whatever the heck they want by saying I'm a donor. And so it's also kind and empathetic to them to say, this is what we need you to do to be successful and to protect our organization and our clients. So look at it that way. Look at it as you're being kind to them.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else on this one? Okay, so back to Menti question 8 of 8. Last quiz, last opportunity to pull yourself up in the leaderboard. The following is not a suitable alternative to dismissal. Reassign to a new position, train or coach or retrain, refer to a better suited organization, or disappear into the shrubs and pretend nothing ever happened. There you go. Perfect. Yes. So disappear into the shrubs, pretend nothing ever happened. Reassign to a new position. It may not always be suitable depending. So if they do an infraction that is so serious they cannot be affiliated with your organization anymore, then don't consider that. But sometimes if it's just that the position isn't a right fit, you might give them a little bit of a performance discussion and then see if they could be more successful in a new position within your organization. But most important thing, don't pretend nothing ever happened by disappearing into the shrubs. That's not the way to do it. All right, nice work. Oh, Frosty up in the lead. You're the winner. I think the confetti means you're the winner. Nice job. Nice job, everyone. So in summary, since we're coming to the end here, to be a good supervisor, basically you want the supervisor themselves must clearly understand the organization's expectations of them in the role. We talked about how people who are competent supervisors of staff and volunteers share a lot of key skills and characteristics, but there are also a few special aspects for volunteer supervision that are a little different than when working with paid staff. The level and type of supervision is going to vary depending on the volunteer opportunity, as well as the type of work your organization does, the style, the size of your organization, how many staff you have, how many volunteers you have. Performance reviews are great and provide an opportunity for open dialogue between the volunteer and the supervisor. It's just important to figure out why are we doing them and what's the best way to scale them so that they're actually a benefit to everyone. There are a lot of ways of approaching difficult volunteer performance issues, ending in sometimes you have to dismiss a volunteer. So it's important to understand what nuts and bolts you need to have in place so that when you do have to dismiss someone, it's not a painful, awful, I never want to do this again sort of experience. So I think that is about it. We've got 5 minutes. So does anyone have any questions or anything that you all want to add?
I always enjoy your teaching and your training. You are
Oh,
wonderful.
good.
Thank
Thank you, Linda. I so appreciate it. I appreciate that a lot. I love being with you all. You're a great group. Anything else?
No, thank you, Nikki. This was really, really insightful. It
Good.
reminds me a lot of kind of standard stuff that you would have for employees. So it's just like taking this platform for employee engagement and retention and kind of applying it to it in a volunteer setting.
Yep. Yeah. And absolutely. A lot of, hopefully you're kind of seeing that through this entire series, that it's a lot of the same principles that we would use with paid staff can apply to volunteers and vice versa. It's just, ultimately, it's just a few of the realities are a little different in terms of like scale is a little different. You may have way more volunteers and fewer staff, or way more staff and fewer volunteers. The number of supervisors you have, how often are they in the, doing work? Are they short term? Are they part-time? And of course, the motivation is a little different, since ultimately with paid positions, you do want people to be motivated by all the same things that volunteers might be, but ultimately with volunteers, you're relying on those motivational styles a little more intensely. So yes, great point. Okay, so Cindy in the chat has previous recordings if you need them in documents via the link. Anything else, Cindy, that you want to add before we end for the day?
Hi, everybody. No, I love being a fly on the wall, listening to all this in the background. But I will again send out reminders for the next sessions. You know what? Let me check and look at the date for the next Ask the Expert. I'm going to open it real quick. April, May, June 23rd will be the next Ask the Expert call. And I can send a reminder for that as well. And again, we're always here for questions, both Chris Kelly and myself. So thank you all.
Great. Yes. Thank you all. You were a great group. Enjoy the rest of your day. All right. Bye.